thanks everyone for coming. This is How Not to Die While Hauling 101. I'm your instructor, Clay Robertson. And we have a special guest instructor, my alt, Lisa Robertson. It's going to be taking it away. Don't worry, I'm not going to do impressions. Okay, so we're going to go over several things here. First, we're going to talk a brief mention of like the services that are available for hauling, and then we're going to talk about hauling with different levels of ships. First, it's going to be T1 haulers, and then we're going to talk about transport ships, so blockade runners and DSGs. And then we're going to talk briefly about hauling with freighters. I have a lot of experience hauling in all kinds of conditions with transport ships, blockade runners and DSGs, but only secondhand experience with freighters. Besides hauling my own stuff for the last 10 years, I did stuff with PushX for a little while. It was kind of fun, actually, surprisingly so. Okay, so first, a couple of links. So for moving things around HiSec and LowSec and NPC null, an excellent service to be aware of is PushX. They'll move just about anything. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're very prompt. A little more expensive than like just general public courier contracts. If time is not an issue, putting up a courier contract for like a pretty low sum and a very safe collateral is a really good idea, actually. If you just need to move a bunch of stuff across the game, like some dude will just take his freighter and autopilot it. Like, I don't know, there's like no price low enough that people won't take public courier contracts for some reason. But they're not fast. So PushX is a great option. We, however, live in nullsec, and so to get your stuff from the edge of HiSec to where we live, Brave Little Toaster has been serving us for about a decade now, going strong. They'll use jump freighters to jump your stuff the last leg. And we'll talk more about how viable it is to move your own stuff through nullsec here in a little bit, but generally speaking, Brave Little Toaster is the way to go. So that's all I'm going to say about services. The rest of this class is going to be about how to move your own stuff. Okay? So there are, of course, haulers for every race, but Galente has the most haulers, has all the unique ones, right? So HiSec is, of course, a scary place, right? We are, of course, war decked, so generally speaking, you should never ever haul anything through HiSec on a Brave Collective account. Use either an alternate corp, or an NPC corp, or ideally use Brave United so that that character can still have docking permissions in Brave Collective structures. That's what I do. That's what this character is on, is Brave United. They can't be war decked, so it's a great option. So talking about T1 haulers first, I'm going to focus on the Nereus for this presentation, but all races have a similar hauler. This thing is pretty fast and has pretty good align time as far as haulers go, which is important because there's only one fit I recommend for hauling in HiSec if you have more than like 20 mil. Call it 20, 30 mil, like deadass. If you have any more than 20, 30 mil, I do not recommend hauling without a micro warp drive cloak fit hauler. As far as T1 haulers go, because you can't get that much EHP. The most EHP you can get on these things is like 40k, and that's on an Iteron with like a full buffer fit, but you can't even carry that much, so what's the point? So if you do this fit though, and you do as I'm about to instruct you, it is almost impossible to die in HiSec or LowSec. So regarding that, there are only about 3 situations that you can die while hauling in HiSec, because you're always going from station to station, right? So there are 3 points in space. The first point in space is when you're undocking. The second point is when you're docking to the station you're going to. And there's a third point. Can anyone tell me what the third point? The only other time that you could possibly die while flying in HiSec space. Yes, specifically while aligning, not when you're landing. It's just worth noting. Yes, thank you. So I have a solution for each one of those problems, and I'm about to share those with you. So the solution to the first problem, which is undocking, is to use an Insta-undock. I'm going to talk in just a moment about how to use how to make an Insta-undock, but now you're going to see me use it. So I'm undocking. I have my locations tab pulled up in my pre-made Insta-undock tactical. created, and I undock and instantly click warp, and you'll see that I warp instantly. Impossible to be ganked on the undock that way. So what the Insta-undock is a tactical that is about 200 or more kilometers off of the undock of the station that you're undocking from. You make it by just getting in any frigate, manual piloting yourself into the direction that you come out of the station at. You have to manual pilot because you'll drift in direction otherwise. You burn it out, save the location, and then you test it by undocking and immediately clicking warp to, and you instant warp. The reason you do this is because there will be insta-locking tornadoes on the undock of places like Jeddah and Amar, and they'll be cargo scanning you, and if you have a decent amount of loot, they will just blap you, and that's that. Nothing you can do about it. If you have a decent amount of tank, they might not do it, but the reason that you don't have a build like that is because of reasons that I'll be showing you in just a moment. So before I move on from Insta-undock, does anyone have any immediate questions regarding that? I buy an Atron, buy a Meta Zero 5MN micro warp drive, plop it on there, and undock. Deadass. That's all I do. Like, I mean, you're burning 200 clicks, and the last time I made this Insta-undock was when they updated the Jeddah station model, and before that I used the same Insta-undock for like 8 years. So it doesn't really change much. So for every, so you just need to, the only thing to know is that, so you come out of the station like this, you're going to start veering off to one side or the other because that's how Eve works. Just try to manual pilot yourself to like go in just the direction that you're already heading. Like click, 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 click. I'm just going straight in that direction, and then you burn out. The important thing is to test it. So you make the tack, you dock, you undock with an empty hauler, you click warp, and if you insta warp, then you're good. This is doable on every station. Yeah, but just, minimum technically minimum 150, but give yourself a little room to breathe. Minimum 200, make it 1,000, 10,000, whatever you want. Yeah, honestly, a little more than 200 would probably be good, just to make sure you're not close to anything, but I've never had a problem. This is about 300, and I've never had a problem. Any other questions? Those were excellent questions. Okay, I'm going to move on now. So the second out of 3 ways that you can die is while docking. And the reason that happens is because if I were to warp to the station right now, I would land maybe within docking range, or maybe about within 2,500 meters outside of docking range, and I'd have to slow boat it in. That's another opportunity to be insta-locked and blapped by a tornado. So here's what you do. You have an insta-dock. So here's my insta-dock tactical. I warp to 0. And I'm not going to do this because I need to talk through it, but I would be holding this right here, and as soon as I saw this light up with dockable, I'd boom, dock. And I'm in docking range every time. So this tactical is just somewhere in the station model, not so close to the station model that I'm in danger of bumping, but also easily within the docking radius of the station. You guys see that? Like, I could also have it like up here somewhere. It's not a big deal. It just needs to be easily within docking radius and also not bumping. Yep, and with those 2 tacks, I have those for Amar and Jeddah, and I actually don't go anywhere but Amar and Jeddah and whatever our forward staging is. Does that make sense to everyone? Are there any questions on that? No, I've not in a single time over my 10 years of hauling very regularly have I ever had someone actually come out and fuck with me at the Insta-undock. That's an excellent question, but no. Yeah, so that is 2 out of the 3 ways that you can die. And now let's address the last one, and this is the only one that involves a bit more talking. So let me warp to a gate here. So I don't want to do that warp. Let's do this warp. There is such a thing called the micro warp drive cloak trick. Most of you have probably heard this at least referenced before. This is the idea that when coming through a gate, if you align to a whatever your warp to object is, and then immediately activate both your cloak and your micro warp drive, while the cloaking device does reduce your speed significantly, the micro warp drive increases your speed even more significantly. And so you cycle your micro warp drive, immediately red cycle it, and then as the micro warp drive cycle is ending, decycle your cloak and hit warp. And if you do it correctly, and your ship is fit correctly, you will warp as soon as you come out of the cloak, meaning that it is impossible for you to be locked up, and so impossible to be pointed. Obviously, a bubble will prevent you from warping, but we're talking about high sec and low sec right now. So that was a lot of words to throw at someone all at once, so let me demonstrate here. So this is going to be my warp 2, right? So imagine I just came through a gate and I'm cloaked, jumping invuln right now, so I'm invisible and I'm invulnerable. And so I'm going to align and then micro warp drive and cloak at the same time. So watch this. Then I red cycle my micro. I'm cloaked right now. There's been no opportunity to target me so far. I'm watching my micro, decloak. And there it is. I could be critical of what I just did and say that I actually had a very brief window at the end where I was still accelerating, but that was actually less than a tick, I'm almost completely sure, so I think that was still impossible to be locked up. Let's see if I can do it even crispier here. So I'm going to talk through this one more time. So I just came through the gate and I'm motionless, right? I'm going to align to whatever the thing is I'm trying to get to, the next gate usually. Not warp to, because if you hit warp, you can't cloak and use and all that jazz. Or sorry, when you do cloak, it'll cancel your align. So I'm going to align, wait an instant. Right, this part is important. You can't align and then mash your cloak in micro warp drive. If you do that, you will die. Because what's going to happen is it's going to say, you can't activate your cloak yet. You're going to say, oh shit, you're going to mash F1, trying to activate your cloak, and then you're going to hit it twice accidentally, and then it's going to be on cooldown, and then you die. It's a tale as old as time. So this isn't hard. It just, you need practice and discipline. You wait almost a second, give or take. It's actually a pretty big window. You just need to not press it right away and not wait more than a tick. So I'm going to align, hit both of these at the same time, or quickly one after another. It doesn't have to be exactly at the same time. And then once this starts cycling, red cycle micro. And then as my micro is ending, decloak. So this is my warp 2, right? So 3, 2, 1, go. I'm like holding the warp, I'm like watching it, I'm waiting. I'm gonna release it at the right time. There we go. Yeah, that was an insta-warp. Keep in mind when the word insta-warp is used, it's less than a tick. So we're talking like half second, that's an insta-warp. And that means you're impossible to be targeted. And that's pretty much the maneuver. You can do this with the Nereus. I don't think you can do it with the Iteron. Or if you can, it ends up like, no, you can't, because you can't fit a 50 mn micro warp drive, only a 5 mn. I don't think you can do it with an Iteron. But you can do this with a lot of different haulers, a lot of different kinds of fits. The important thing is that there's no single fit that makes it work. Typically, it's a T2 or faction cloak, right? Improved cloaking device or better. A 50 mn micro warp drive. See, I have a metaphor here, nothing special. And then however many inertial stabs you need to get it done. Some ships can do it with 1 or 2. Some ships need 3. But however many you need, and it just depends on how good of modules you have for your cloak and your micro. It depends on your navigation skills largely, on your Galente hauler skills, that sort of thing. Yeah. The inertial stabs make you align faster, obviously, right? But it makes it, that also affects while you're using your micro warp drive. And so I get up to maximum speed within the cycle of the micro warp drive. If I didn't have them, I might not actually need 2 here, but if I didn't have a good enough inertia stat, I wouldn't actually get to a high enough speed to warp by the end of my micro warp drive cycle. The goal is to get your speed up to I think it's 90%. I think it's 90%. You have to get your speed up to warp speed, which I believe is 90% full velocity within the duration of the micro warp drive. That's the goal. So that when you come out, you warp instantly. And it's really good to have a little bit of buffer, like a little bit of room, wiggle room, you know, so that you don't have to time it perfectly. I'll show you guys this in a second, because we're actually gonna elaborate on that with the DSG. Yeah, I'm actually gonna take a break from talking about my warp drive cloak trick for a second, and then I'm gonna come back to it. Let me get a sip of water. Sorry, 1 second. Did that answer your question? You are targetable when you have been decloaked for more than 1 tick. Yeah, not really. No. It indicates the start of the tick, I guess you could say that. But just because there is like you can actually wait a considerable amount of time, like close to a second before you cloak, and you're not targetable. Um, Ideally, like you practice it and you get it, down so that you have a good rhythm for it. Like I cannot emphasize enough that this is all about practice. Just do it several times so that when you jump into a gate camp and you're like, oh shit, you don't overthink it. You just say, I've done this 100 times, I've done this 1,000 times. I just do it and it works. That's the goal. It's kind of bolder stuff hauling actually. I kind of like it. It's kind of like, it's like you got to get your mechanics right. Anyways, so I'm gonna elaborate more on the micro drive cloak trick with the DST. So the DST is one of the 2 kinds of transport ships, which are T2 hauling ships. You have to train a racial hauling to 5. Um, the Galente ones are some of the most popular because for a couple reasons. Galente tends to have the most hull hit points for hull tanking. They tend to have the best inertia along with Minmatar, and I think they tend to have the most cargo space of the races. So when like just but before you add in like low slots and stuff, they tend to have the most default cargo space. So Minmatar is popular, but like Caldari's DSG has the most passive tank, I think. I think that's true. And Amar is probably a better passive tank as well. But Galente is very popular. I've never trained another one. I've enjoyed it very much, so I guess I recommend Galente. So the DST has a very small cargo space, as you see here, 3,900. But the fleet hangar is 60,000, and it's actually 62,500 at level 5 transport ships. So this is the most space of a non-freighter ship in the game, to my knowledge. Yeah, no, it definitely is. Most space besides a freighter. This thing is a workhorse. I use this all the time. So you should read the info panel on one of these transport ships. It's very important. It has a bunch of really interesting bonuses. So armor resistances, velocity, and overheating benefits for local repair and prop mods. And then 2+ bonus to ship warp core strength. That means there has to be at least 3 points of warp disruption on you for you to be pointed. So I'm going to make a point here, and it's very important, and I want you all to try to understand it. So a lot of people will fit their DSTs for tank, and more tank, and it would make sense because it has a bunch of bonuses for tanking. It's inherently quite tanky. I have no tank mods on this thing, and it's 36k EHP. You can get them up to 100+, right? A lot of people do that. I think that is stupid, and here's why. A lot of the time, if someone's gonna go after you in your DSG, they are going to be prepared to have more than a couple points of warp stability or warp disruption, and they're going to have, oftentimes enough dudes that they can like scram web you and DPS you down before you can burn to gate with an overheating afterburner, while webbed. Like you're not going to move that fast. Like you might get out 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 times, but how much ISK do you really want to haul if you're only going to get out 4 out of 5 times, So what I recommend is instead the micro warp drive cloak trick, just like we did with the Nereus. The only difference here, notably, let me undock here. I'm going to show you guys. So there is an important trick to know about the micro warp drive cloak trick when flying large ships. If you need a little extra oomph for the micro warp drive cloak, to get up to speed before you come out of your cloak, you can time it so that you exit your cloak a little bit early, just the tiniest bit early. And you'll get a little bit of extra speed because your micro warp drive will run the last like 2%, 5% of its cycle without the cloak's velocity modifier. And that'll ensure that you get up to speed. Ideally, you should have plenty of room to spare, and I run triple inertial stab, which I recommend something similar to this, just to make sure that I, don't fuck it up. So otherwise it's exactly the same one. I'm going to demonstrate now, micro warp drive cloak trick. Let's see. Can I do like blah. Okay, that's fine. I'm just gonna do that, I guess. Whatever. Okay. So 3, 2, 1, demonstrating. So I'm a big boy, but I'm getting up to speed because I got those inertials. This thing flies more like an Iteron than anything, so I'm gonna end early. So if I needed that oomph of speed, I would have gotten it right there by ending my cloak a little bit early. I actually don't need it for this ship, but you get the idea. Yeah, so everything else on this ship is a just in case. The MJD and the afterburner are there as a just in case. The afterburner in case they get scrammed and need to burn back to the gate. You should obviously be overheating in that situation, and you have overheating bonuses with this ship. Or you should use your MJD. I've never actually used either of these. In like all of the bajillion jumps that I've done, I've lost one DST and one Blockade runner in my life, and they were both to Thera, or wormholes. I don't know if they were both Thera. I think one was Thera and one was another hole. But yeah, wormholes are scary. And back then you didn't have the interdiction nullifier. So, specifically, what was the question on MWD cloak trick earlier that I said I would address later? I thought I addressed it in that, but I'm not sure. I can't remember what the question was. What was that question? Yes, thank you. That's the reason I have so many. So on here, see, I have 3. If I only had like 2 or 1, it would, if I did the same trick, I would only get to like 50% velocity, and I wouldn't be able to warp straight out of my cloak. That's the difference, and it's of course crucial to what we're doing. Does that? Like from the fitting screen? Not unless you're a math whiz and you could somehow do the math. 75% here, 510% boost, 30%, I don't know. No, you just gotta try it. But once you figure it out, I mean, I've had the same DST fit for 10 years. I engineered it, when I bought it, and I haven't changed it since. I might could even honestly take one off because my skills on this tune are a lot better than they used to be. But what would I put here? Like you don't put expanded cargo holds on a DST because it would affect this, not your fleet hanger. Your fleet hanger space cannot change. It cannot be increased. Which is kind of a bummer, but it's nice that you don't need to fill your low slots with cargo expanders. And your rigs can be hyperspatials or something else, not expanded cargo holds. Does that answer your question? Cool. Are there any other questions on DST? Okay, I would cover this first. So this is a good point to point out that DSTs can fit an interdiction nullifier. Interdiction nullifier, I'm going to try to describe this concisely and accurately. An interdiction nullifier is an active module that, when activated, if the player afterwards initiates a warp, that warp will not be inhibited by a warp disruption field, such as a Victor bubble or Hector bubble or stationary bubble. The reason I phrased it that specifically is if you activate it after you initiate warp, you will still be affected by the bubble. You will still be stop bubbled, or your warp, won't be allowed to commence if, you haven't activated the module yet. So how you have to use this in the micro warp drive cloak trick is you'd have to activate it at the last moment as you come out of your cloak, or you might could actually activate it as you're cloaking, one of the two. You'd have to activate it in one of those 2 ticks before you hit the warp button. Still possible, but yeah. And I'll talk more on using that here in a moment when we kind of get through talking about high sec and low sec hauling. Man, it's been 25 minutes already. I gotta get a move on. Does anyone have any outstanding questions on the DST before I move on? because that's an excellent question. Let me show you. So DST, we said 60,000 plus like 3,900, right, for carrying capacity. Let's here is a max cargo fit Blockade runner. Sorry, let me refit to max cargo. So 6,400 with just cargo rigs. $13,430. So that the one reason why you would prefer to use a DST over a Blockade runner is because it carries about 5 times more stuff. But let's talk a little bit about the Blockade runner and why you might prefer to use this over the DST for a lot of situations. So the Blockade runner is much faster and has a lower align time. It's a align time of like 5.4 without inertial mods, or like 3.5 with inertial mods. It's fast, right? It warps at, with Transport Ships 4, it warps at 7.2 AU per second. With an implant and a single hyperspatial in the lows, and hyperspatial rigs, it gets up to like 12 AU a second. 12 AU a second while carrying 13,400 in your cargo hold. It's very fast. And importantly, it can use a covert ops cloaking device, which allows it to warp cloaked. So no mark warp drive cloak check for us. You just hit warp and cloak. It's that easy. And the only way you can be caught in low sec or high sec is if you jump into a camp that has cans dropped around it, so that you spawn close to a can and you can't cloak. That's a thing that low sec campers will do. It's not super common. That's why it's important to use a scout when you're going through low sec. But that's pretty much the only way you can get caught, because no one's going to decloak you in 3.5 seconds or 3 seconds, because if it's the last second, they're not going to have time to cloak to get you. So you're basically safe as long as you don't run into something like that, or jump into like where there's a bunch of Concord and the Concord decloaks you. That's super frustrating. So that's well and good, and that sounds super safe, but there's a very important thing, the most important thing to know about the Blockade runner, which people neglect all the time, and they forget about this. Immune to all cargo scanners. So suicide gankers can't check what's in your inventory before they decide to gank you like they can when you're in a DST. So you might think, oh cool, that means I'm safe. No. That means that a suicide ganker rolls out of bed that morning and he decides one of two things. He either decides, I am not going to shoot Blockade runners today, or I am going to shoot Blockade runners today. Because your EHP is not very impressive. 8k on this guy with no tanking modules. You could probably get this up to 15, maybe. You don't have any power grid. Look, 160 power grid. You got nothing. You can't tank with this thing. So like a couple of tornadoes and you're dead. And people will just roll the dice, hoping that the Blockade runner is holding a lot of loot. Because people move the most valuable of assets with a Blockade runner, because it's the only ship that can't be cargo scanned. So, what does this mean for us? You can never, ever autopilot a Blockade runner if you want to expect not to die. Ever. Even if it's empty. If you want to just be a wild child and go for it, I mean, good luck. But you should expect to die if you autopilot a Blockade runner. And it also means we always have to cloak when we warp. That one's not as important because it's a low align time, but I would still enormously, massively recommend only use this when you have, at trade hubs, when you have an Insta-dock and Insta-undock, when at all possible, and always have a covops and always use it. Always have a covops cloaking device and always use it. But yeah, these things are awesome. They can be bridged by a Black Ops, which is cool. So if you want to run your own little jump freighter service, you can have if you have a Sino, a Black Ops, and a Blockade runner, you can jump that thing around, which is super cool. Yeah, that is the Blockade runner. Does anyone have any outstanding questions about the Blockade runner? No? Cool, 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 cool. Yeah, thing flies is faster than an interceptor and carries 13K worth of goods while doing it. It's a cool ship. So that is transport ships. So this is like a max cargo Viator. In the MOTD, you'll see all the fits that I'm showing you guys here today. The other one would be like a max speed. If you have, your cargo is less than 4,500, you can, run around with 2 inertials, hyperspatial, and hyperspatial rigs, 11.4 AU per second before implants. All right, it's pretty fast. And then this, oh yes, let's talk about autopiloting for a second. So I said before, no autopiloting with a T1 hauler. It's just not smart with anything more than like 30 mil, because you have such low EHP. It's such a small commitment to kill you. Maybe like 100 mil, but I think that's pushing it. It just depends on what people, it's a crowd opinion thing. So if you're gonna autopilot, use a DST, right? And fit it with all passive tanking. So hull tanking is a good option, or just passive armor with no active modules, because you're going to be AFK, right? Because you're autopiloting. That's the only reason anyone would ever autopilot is to be AFK. So my rule is no more than half a bill for autopiloting this thing. That's more than what a lot of people would do. Most people would probably recommend like 300 mil top end for a DST autopiloting. This fit has 105k EHP. That's pretty decent. You can get some other fits up to like 115k with good skills, but my hauler alt has pretty bad skills for most things. And so this thing is slow as hell, but it doesn't matter. I undock it, I set destination to Kebbers, and hit autopilot and come back in 2 hours. That's what I do. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions before I go on to nullsec and freighters? Cool. Okay. Quick note on freighters here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but I'm going to speak to what I can confidently speak on. So freighters cost a couple bill. They hold, about 6 times as much as a DST. I think like 300k, 440 before cargo expanders. They carry a lot of stuff, but their align time is about 30 seconds. To run a freighter properly with high value stuff in your hold, you should really use a webbing ship. That's the right way to do it. You should use a Hugin or something. Do triple, quadruple web, and you're in fleet with your alt, and when you jump through, you align for like 2 seconds, and then your alt hits you with a triple web, and you're gone. That's the right way to do it. You should also use Insta-docks, carefully made Insta-docks for freighters, for sure. Well, so I say that, but usually that's not where you die. The only place you're going to die in a freighter is a 0.5 system. Maybe a 0.6. That's the only place you're going to die, though, is 0.5 and 0.6, mostly 0.5, because it's a lot of EHP to chew through. So there'll be like fleets of catalysts that'll just try to gank you. It'll take like 20 of them, but they'll do it. For autopiloting a freighter, I think most people will limit themselves to a bill, but honestly, probably 500 mil is probably smarter for autopiloting. But this is, I say these rules, and I've never gotten ganked, but it's possible that I'm being too risk averse, and you could do more than this. I've never been suicide ganked though, because nice. Yep, that'll happen. So, and that's why I say like when I haul more than a bill, I pretty much micro drive cloak trick every jump. That's not like pretty much every jump. It's kind of a pain, but when you're moving, usually I split my moves up into like sections of like 300 mil, 400 mil, and just try to run autopilot trips back and forth, or I throw it all into one, throw all the expensive stuff into one. I'll run like 3 or 4 bill if I'm paying attention and using the micro drive cloak trick. I don't care. Like I've never been caught. In high, for sure in high sec. In low sec I'd be a little more risk averse, but yeah. So that's kind of the skinny on freighters. If anyone has any specific questions, I could try to answer it. I won't talk more than what I know confidently, but I may have to tell you to look elsewhere for information. Does anyone have a question they'd like to ask? No, you don't. Um, yeah, so the reason for that, jump freighters. Ask anyone who flies a jump freighter, and they'll tell you that the biggest mistake they ever made was training into jump freighters. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I have heard that, but so jump freighters are used in exactly one way. You undock from the border high-sec system, you jump to low-sec or null-sec, wherever you're bringing stuff into, to a sino that is easily within tether range on preferably a Fortizar or a Keepstar. You dock, drop off your stuff, undock, jump to a low-sec system that borders high-sec to a Citadel, which you have tether rights, and then you warp to gate and jump through. And you rinse, repeat. That's what you do with a jump freighter. You make dank ISK. Like you make a lot of money doing jump freighting, for sure. That's what Brave Little Toaster, 100% of their freight that they're importing is done with jump freighter. It is the ship for getting stuff from high sec to null sec. My only advice is to, if you're fairly new in the game, don't make jump freighting a goal. They cost 10 billion ISK, and they're easy to lose if you don't know what you're doing, and they're not exactly fun. There's a lot of much more interesting ways to make ISK in the game than doing jump freighters. That being said, if you learn all about them and you're playing the game for a while and you're like, okay, I do want to do jump freighters, go for it. Just make sure that you do your diligence. Ask your peers. We have a great, people in Brave Little Toaster will talk you through everything, teach you how to do it. Yeah, that's pretty much my 2 cents on that one. Does anyone have any more questions about jump freighters? Yes, so they also have jump fatigue, but it is a tenth of what it is for ships that don't have jump fatigue reduction. So very little, but yes, they do have it. Big difference. You can effectively jump, 5 minutes. It's about 5 minutes, I think, for most jumps, if you don't want any fatigue at all. I mean, so here's the thing. So, okay, cool, you have the skills, right? My only encouragement is just for young players to not make it like, I'm new to the game and jump freighters is my goal. Like if you want to do like construction, cool, like get a freighter and eventually like if you get enough ISK and it makes sense once you're a year or two into the game, like once you're a year or two into the game, you'll know all about jump freighting and you'll know what it's like to run a jump freighter and you'll know a little bit more about what the risks are and then you can decide then. It's just it's a huge financial commitment. You also need like to have 5 bill plus in your wallet at any given time for collateral, like emphasis on the plus, like plus plus. So it's just a huge sink of resources, and unless you're like a titan of industry, then it doesn't make sense. But once it makes sense for you, you'll know it makes sense, and then you'll be like, oh, this is what he was talking about. Like I know it makes sense for me now, so I'm gonna do it. Does that make sense? Cool, cool, cool. Yeah, I just want people to like have realistic expectations. Like it's not it's its own thing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Anything else on freighters before I move on? Good questions. I mean, regular freighters are they're what they are. I guess I would also recommend not making it an initial goal. But if that's your can of worms, like you want like these things warp 1.5 AU a second, make sure 1.37 AU per second. Oh man, and you can put hyperspatial low slots, but look, they'd only have, check it out, fitting window looks hilarious for freighters. 3 low slots, that's all you got, and 3.6 power grid and 1.2 CPU. This is a freighter. This is your life. You can fit cargo expanders and hyperspatials and bulkheads. That's it. So, about what? Economizers. What were the economizers? Oh, well, jump freighters can. Oh, I'm talking about I'm talking about the normal freighter. Think excellent point though. No, 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 excellent point. Thank you for pointing that out. You can fit jump fuel economizers on jump freighters, and that's really the only thing that you would ever fit on a jump freighter, honestly. But I would just, if you're less than 4 months into the game, I would encourage people to look at other stuff in the game, like even industry and mining before hauling. And then if you're like 6 months into the game and you really want to like fly a freighter for some reason, go for it. I only encourage people to be educated on what they're getting themselves into. That's my only encouragement. Yeah, great questions, guys. Great questions. Anything else? Oh yeah, some things are so large you have to use a freighter, like and oftentimes they're getting bridged around by Titans. Some people who are like these big industry magnate people, they'll have like, you know, 10 mining accounts, and then they'll all be trained into freighters, and then they'll also have a Titan, and then they'll just like bridge around their Titans. That's like a thing people do. It's kind of wild, but like, yeah, there are a lot of uses for freighters in nullsec. You just don't typically gate them. If you do, it's in a very specific circumstance that necessitates it. But usually you're bridging them or moving them between citadels if you have a freighter in nullsec. Yeah. 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 But yeah, so key takeaways here are uh, a tank is a misnomer with haulers. Micro drive cloak, if you actually care about not dying, if you really care, the micro drive cloak trick is the way to go. If you're, if you're going through low sec, just do that. You'll usually be safe, but I would 100% encourage to use an alt to scout yourself through low sec gates, especially like high camping low sec gates. Like if you set Desto right now from Jita to Kebers and I hit prefer shorter, I go, oh, only one low sec system. What's the worst thing that could happen? I guarantee you there's a camp at that system right now. Or if there's not, there was one recently and there will be one soon. Like, yeah, people are smart. They know what systems to camp. So if you're going to go through low sec, it's fine. Just scout yourself through. If you don't have an ult, then try to take safer paths, or even just go to the border system, get out of your ship, put it in a station, jump through, check that it's clear or not, and then bring your ship through. It's not as good, and you might still get fucked, but it's a lot better than not checking. And then a couple quick notes. I'm pretty much out of time here, but a couple quick notes about nullsec hauling. Generally speaking, my advice is to not haul in nullsec unless you have to. So unless where you're going isn't serviced by Brave Freight and you don't have access to a carrier or another kind of capital, like usually if I have to move something in nullsec, I just put it into a capital and jump it that way. But it is doable in either a DST or a Blockade Runner. Blockade Runner preferred because both of them can fit the interdiction nullifier. That's what I was going to hit on. Interdiction nullifier. No, I talked about that, didn't I? Yeah, no, I did. Yeah, so obviously always have an interdiction nullifier if you're going through nullsec. And just, you really need to be scouted, like carefully scouted, either by yourself with an alt or someone constantly communicating with you through voice comms, scouting you through the systems that you're going through. And like you can run camps, especially with a Blockade Runner, but I wouldn't. Just be smart. But yeah, I would suggest using Freight.Braveneve whenever you can for nullsec hauling. But if you're feeling gangster, and most importantly you have a scout, you can go. If you have to go through nullsec and you don't have a scout, use a Blockade Runner, because it's, can still get caught for sure. Because like, here's what they do. So you jump into a gate camp. You say, haha, I use my interdiction nullifier, and you warp to the next gate. Saber follows you, bubbles you on that gate. Well, your shit's on cooldown now, so you're fucked. Like, that's how you die. So don't try to run gate camps, but if you have to run a gate camp, warp to a celestial so that you can safe up and wait out your timer and like be safe that way. Don't warp to the next gate. Yeah. Well, that is coming up on my time, but I'm happy to answer any more questions. Does anyone have a question? But any of the stuff that we covered, or anything related to hauling that I didn't cover? Actually, so I'm not gonna speak too confidently on this because I need to double check the math, but actually a lot of people use the meta zero because while its active cycle is shorter, its reactivation cycle is significantly shorter also, which is good. Even though the active cycle being shorter is bad, it usually doesn't matter because you just need it for the first second because you're going to warp, right? I'll try to concisely state that again. Um, the player must have the interdiction nullifier module active at the moment that they click warp. Otherwise, it will not take into effect. So you have to hit it first and then warp. You can align, hit it, and then warp, but it must be active before you hit warp. So you hit warp while it's active, and then it runs out while that same warp is still initiating. I I'll be honest, I have not tested that, but I would be willing to bet strongly, like 90% confidence, that it would still work because warps are calculated in Eve at the moment that you press warp. For the same reason that if you click warp and then and you're in a freighter, you click warp and then 10 seconds later a bubble goes up on the gate that you're going to, and then you warp, you'll go through the bubble because it's calculated when you hit warp. No, no. So all bubbles can stop a warp. They can be stop bubbles, drag bubbles. It's all the same mechanic. Okay, it's just that the difference, I guess, is if you're on grid. So if you hit warp and then like you get bubbled on grid, then of course your warp will be canceled. But if the gate that you're going to is bubbled while after you've already hit warp, you will go through the bubble. I I think we're talking about the same thing. I will only make a final comment to say that okay, yeah, just hic bubbles are not different from other bubbles. Just, yeah, fundamentally, they're still bubbles. Cool. Okay. Anything else? Anyone have any other questions? Great questions. I guess if you had to, 99.9% of the time, unless the freighter has a massive escort fleet because it's part of a strategic objective, anything outside of high sec where you need a freighter, you'll use a jump freighter, except for Thera, of course. Thera and wormholes, you'll use a normal freighter because there's no reason to have a jump freighter in wormholes. But you know, if you're ever taking if you're taking a freighter into a wormhole, you know what you're doing because you have a good reason to be taking a freighter into a wormhole. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. So there should be no reason that there's a freighter in low sec unless you have a very good reason to have a freighter in low sec. So basically never. Yeah. Okay, that's pretty much my time. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude the class. Thank you all very much. You were great students, asked great questions. Always feel free to hit me up if you have any follow-up questions at another time. And I'm going to conclude the class now. Thank you. You guys have a good night.